What's at the top of Jerry Brown's agenda as he completes his historic second act as California's governor in 2018? Will the legislature follow his lead? And who's in line to replace him? Who and what else will voters be deciding on in 2018? And could 2018 usher in a U.S. Supreme Court decision reversing 40 years of precedents and delivering a crippling political blow to public employee unions in California? We'll ask John Myers of the LA Times and Dan Walters of Cal Matters. California politics in 2018, what to expect.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. Chevron's Coalinga oil field and Fresno County have been doing side by side for over 100 years. Learn more at doers.com. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. So what is Governor Brown's agenda in his final year in office? We're joined by two astute observers of state politics, Dan Walters with Cal Matters and John Myers of the LA Times. So John, let me start with you. What do you think are going to be the big issues front and center for Governor Brown and his agenda in 2018?
Well, I mean, the underlying part of what you're talking about, Mark, is how much can he get done in the final year of office? How much does he want to get done? How much can he get done? I mean, if you look at just what Jerry Brown talks about, there are two things he's talked about more than anything recently. Well, first of all, from the very beginning when he came in 2011 for the second tour in Sacramento, it was the state's finances. The projections are that we could have a windfall of money, a big windfall of money.
Like $11 billion or something.
How will he spend it? How will he rein lawmakers, Democrats in the legislature back in? I think that's going to be one. And then the other one's climate change. He's talked about climate change at every single moment, at least over the last couple of years. Is there something else on the climate change agenda after cap and trade, after all the things of 2017? Is there a moment he can go out with? I don't know that there is, but I bet he'll talk about it.
I don't think there is a moment. I don't think there is a moment on climate change. They've done whatever they can do, and it's all in process. It's setting goals for 2030 and that sort of thing. So how can you go beyond what there's the people around the Capitol are talking about things like banning all internal combustion engines by 2050, or going 100% renewables.
Well, let's not scare people. That's not something that's going to be happening.
I don't think that there's a lot that can be done on that level. I agree with John. I think his main focus will be basically get out alive on the state budget, have a surplus left for the next governor rather than a deficit, and mostly hope the economy holds together until he's out of office, because there's some little things on the horizon about that.
Well, let me follow up on that. There's an $11.5 billion budget surplus according to the Legislative Analyst's Office for fiscal year 16-17. Don't you think Governor Brown might loosen the purse strings and say, I'm going to spend some of that money on products I care about?
That's a so-called rainy day fund, basically. And no, I don't think he's going to touch the rainy day fund. In fact, he'd probably like to add a little bit to it. But getting back to his agenda, the budget, number one, I think he's dropped hints on a couple other things. He's dropped hints about doing something else on pensions, for example. Mm-hmm. And he's dropped a very, very oblique hint about revisiting K-12 education and seeing whether the thing that he got through the legislature 5 years ago still holds water. There's a lot of criticism of it.
That's the local control funding formula?
Local control funding formula. Mm-hmm. So I think I kind of doubt, for some reason, that it's going to be a big agenda year, because then he runs the risk of not getting that agenda, going out on a sour note, not having another year to see it through.
But he's got a lot of money in sitting on the side there.
Well, you mean in his campaign account?
In his campaign account.
Yeah, but just to kind of tie a bow on the point that you raised, Mark, if you look at what the governor spent money on, he has spent money, he's advocated for spending money on one-time expenses rather than ongoing expenses. Right. So that's where the debt issues get in, the wall of debt that he paid down. But he could also be asked by Democrats in the legislature to do more about housing. I mean, housing was an issue that they did something on in 2017, but it was a small thing they did on it. And to your point, I mean, yes, he could take something to the ballot. He's got about $15 million in a campaign account, but he hasn't acted as though he has something he wants to run on the ballot. But never say never with the guy.
That's right. You never know.
If he had a ballot measure to take, it might be something like CEQA reform or something like that. But there's a lot they can do on housing to close the housing gap. 80,000 unit a year housing gap takes $26 billion more spent on housing every year. The state doesn't have
we
that.
We don't have that surplus.
You can't do it with state funds. You're going to find a way to kind of free up the free market to build more houses. John, let me ask you, are we just looking at a dem-on-dem gubernatorial race in 2018? Is there any chance a Republican could break through?
people beyond me have made these predictions and then eating crow after an election day. I don't know. I mean, what you're getting at here is the top two primary system, the fact that Democrats have such a preponderance of the electorate vis-a-vis Republicans that you would think that two of them could move forward. I still think it's tough. It's early, first of all. I mean, no matter what time people are watching this, it's still early in 2018. If the Republicans could coalesce around a candidate, and that's 24% of the registered voters, that probably would be good enough if you had a lot of Democrats split the Democratic vote. But the Republicans don't seem coalesced at this point, and so it's a possibility.
But that is the question. Someone might jump in on the Republican side that could coalesce.
Well, there's talk about that.
Or drop out.
Your favorite former mayor, Swearingen, was one of those that people talked about. Faulkner, the mayor of San Diego, was another. But there doesn't seem to be anybody out there on that horizon that can bring, and there's not any really encouragement of it because it would cost a lot of money and the Republicans don't have very much money. Here's, I think, is the key to the whole thing. It will be Dem on Dem unless there are three viable Democrats going into the primary, splitting up the vote. If either, one of those is going to be Gavin Newsom. He's going to be in the runoff regardless, I'm sure. The question is, will he face another Democrat? And that depends on whether either Antonio Villaraigosa or John Chung falter badly enough that it really isolates those two as the thing. And I think that's more likely than not. I believe.
I know she's only at 4%, but Delane Easton, you're the woman. Things that, who knows?
She polls the lowest, the very lowest among all six among women voters.
Let me throw in another item in the mix here too, which is like, who's the electorate in 2018? It's not a presidential year; it's an off year, so it's a governor's race, statewide races. What's the Trump factor? He's not on the ballot, but he is almost on the ballot if you're a Democrat. Newsom needs that super liberal, angry Trump electorate to show up. Those are his people. Villaraigosa's looking for a path, John Chung's looking for a path in other parts of the Democratic ballot. But if you don't know who the electorate is, you don't really know how this is going to come out. And if turnout is low, I think that's another question about who.
I think there's probably a possibility of a very low Republican turnout next year, and that's got the Republican Party, which would make it more likely that there'll be two Democrats in November.
Well, I guess we'll see. Up next, we're going to talk about the legislative agenda in 2018. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Dan Walters of Cal Matters and John Myers with the LA Times about the political year upcoming in the state capitol. So Dan, sexual harassment, pretty big issue in the state capitol in 2017. What's going to be the impact in 2018? Is it going to be the year of the woman?
Well, some people think it's going to be the year of the woman. Last time we had one was in 1992, so we're probably overdue for another year of the woman. But I don't think so, not in the dramatic sense it was in 1992 in California. But clearly the sex harassment scandal, as they say in showbiz, has legs, so to speak. It'll run on for a while. And it's probably going to shake up things quite a bit in the Capitol once the legislature actually gets back in business. All this occurred after the legislature was gone for the year, so we haven't seen the full impact of that yet. But at the very least, it could cost the Democrats their supermajority if some of these legislators have to bid farewell. And at the most, we could see a big shakeup in the whole thing. I think also the fallout could hit Kevin De Leon, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, who's been kind of behind the curve on this whole thing. So
I'm just wondering, what do you think about
two quick things? I think not necessarily looking at the electoral equation right now, but first of all, inside the Capitol, the procedure of business, the way business is done, the way the complaint system works about harassment and misconduct, I think that has to change. I think the clamor for change is intense. I think the more the legislature circles the wagons as the institution, the worse off it is for them, both in the public and then also kind of the way business runs. And the other thing I was going to say really quickly is I think that look at a couple of the members who've had accusations against them, one of which had resigned by year's end. That was Raul Bocanegra of Southern California and Matt DeBobne of the Southern California, both mods from the centrist Democratic universe. Any power dynamic about mods, centrists, liberals, regardless of who the person is could change the legislative agenda.
I think there's one more thing, and something John pointed out in a recent column, and that is that this has also underscored the fact that the legislature operates by different rules than other governments in terms of open records and open meetings and that sort of thing. I think it might crack open the legislative records to be for scrutiny, like we can scrutinize those of other government agencies.
Yeah, businesses act a little bit differently when they're hit with these kind of sexual harassment claims. John, let me ask you, so what do you see on the legislative agenda for 2018?
They did a lot in 2017. I mean, Democrats who are in the majority crowed that it was like the most successful legislative year in recorded history, something to that effect. But they are right, they had a lot on the agenda. I think in the early going, I think you have some people who say, let's keep the conversation going on housing. Dan's made a good point. It's hugely expensive. I don't know how you do that. I think it's going to be dictated by Washington. Again, I think we're going to have another year of the resistance of what Trump and Republicans in Washington are doing. You certainly see that from especially Kevin De Leon, the pro tem. I do want to mention, you asked about policies, and so I'm not really sure yet. My crystal ball is not great, but we will have a new leader of the California State Senate, a new president pro tem. De Leon terms out and is running for the Senate. Who will that person be? What will their agenda be? And then one final one, just because I want to put one right under there, which is it's an election year. And we have serious election administration issues that need to be resolved in the state. We have a brand new system where we're going to send out absentee ballots to everybody in some counties and close down polling places. We had a voting modernization bond that failed to get traction in the Capitol, and there's money that needs to be spent to upgrade. The counties certainly feel like that. So I think it's an election year always makes things combustible.
Yeah, that voting new law is interesting what effect that's going to have. So what do you think, Dan? What's going to be the agenda for the legislature?
I think a lot of something we alluded to earlier, and that is they're for the time being anyway, the economy continues to be good, and the state is going to have some money to spend if it wishes to spend it. And a lot of, I think, is going to be Democrats, particularly the kind of resurgent, re-energized left wing of the Democratic Party, wants more. They want more spending on particularly social and health programs. And the question is whether Jerry Brown, in his last year, since he no longer has to face voters, will kind of give in to that, or will continue to be insistent on building reserves and holding a line on spending. I think that's going to be a big issue, particularly in the first half of the year.
Okay, so up next we're going to talk about the California congressional races in November. Could they change the balance of power in Washington? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking to John Myers of the LA Times and Dan Walters of Cal Matters about the year ahead. Let's turn our attention to the California congressional races. President Trump and the Republican Congress really have an abysmal approval rating among California voters. Only about a quarter approve of what they're doing. So, John, how do you see this federal-state conflict playing out in 2018?
I think it's going to be really interesting. We've seen Democrats in California very, very vocal. In 2017, we saw them about everything that the president wanted to do or that Republicans wanted to do: healthcare, climate change, immigration. Here's the template that I look at when you talk about those congressional races. You have 14 Republicans from California in Congress right now. 7 of those Republicans, 7 of them, are in districts that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. They have been targeted by national Democrats. They could be key to a national Democratic strategy of trying to take back the House, which would be dramatic. They're on the coast. There's some inland, some of the names we know. Some are new players that we actually thought were in safe seats. I think that is going to be really interesting how those 7 members in particular navigate what happens in Washington when they come
Change the balance of power in Washington?
Well, I think you can argue that the Democrats can't change the balance of power in Washington unless they win at least a few seats in California. What are the chances of doing that? They probably are pretty good chances, but you also have to keep in mind that in an off-year election like 2018 will be, turnout is going to be lower than it was in last year's presidential election. So the voting profile, well, it'll be lower. The question is how much lower.
Right.
And it could be a lot lower, as it was in 2014, or it could be somewhere, probably somewhere in the middle.
It seems like voters are paying attention, though.
They are, but it's not going to be a presidential election year turnout. Mm-hmm. So just because Hillary Clinton won in 7 districts doesn't necessarily mean those same Democratic voters are going to turn out next time. They may or they may not, but it's not guaranteed. And these 7 presumably vulnerable Republican congressional members are incumbents. They have that going for them, and they're mostly in pretty conservative districts, basically. So chances, yeah, I could see Democrats picking up 1 or 2, maybe 3 seats, but a big surge, I kind of doubt.
I think the real question is, what's the Republican turnout in 2018 in California? How interested are they in this race? How much do they align with what's going on with President Trump and don't align or want to be involved in it? If those Republicans don't show up, to Dan's point, the Democrats could have a better chance. If they show up as they have traditionally, those incumbents are probably in better shape.
And a factor that is oddly enough, whether there's going to be this gas tax repeal on the ballot, because the state Republican Party is hoping that having the gas tax repeal on the ballot will turn out Republican voters and help them keep those congressional seats, and also perhaps even enhance their chances of picking up a seat or two in the legislature.
Dan, let me ask you about the U.S. Senate race, Dianne Feinstein and Kevin DeLeon. Looks like she's going to cruise to re-election at this point. Is there anything that could derail her at this point?
Well, of course something could derail her. She's up there in years, although not as old as I used to think she was, as I've gotten older. I think the real question is whether the Democratic Party in California, that resurgent left wing, is strong enough to push her out. I'm not sure that it is, and I'm not sure that Kevin DeLeon is probably the candidate to make it happen. And particularly, I'm not sure that he can do it while trying to balance out this sex harassment scandal in the legislature. I would say that Dianne Feinstein is probably, in my humble opinion, maybe 80% being reelected. But her health could turn bad. I think it's also a very important factor is that it's pretty clear that she probably did not want to run for reelection. She's kind of made that herself. And so there's a very big chance, I think, that if she does win, she will at some point resign from the Senate and then allow the next governor to make an appointment to the U.S. Senate seat. That could be the feeding frenzy of all times in California.
What do you think about that whole election? By the way, why isn't Kevin DeLeon caught on more? He's considered progressive. He's had a lot of legislative victories.
It's early. It's early. I think it's hard for any legislator to stand out. This is a huge state. It takes a lot to get that name ID up there. But I was going to say about the U.S. Senate race, I'm fascinated by what will Republican voters do. Back to Republican voters again. There is no standard bearer in that race at this point. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks and months. There's no standard bearer. What do those Republicans do? Do they vote for a Dianne Feinstein because she's more centrist or whatever you would think, foreign policy? Or do they skip that vote, that one on the ballot, like they did a lot between Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez in 2016, which could help the more liberal faction of Democrats and the De Leon supporters, ostensibly, have a bigger voice? I don't know, but again, I'm fascinated about Republican voters.
There's one other factor in that is that Dianne Feinstein has a lot of money in the bank to run for election, and she will have no trouble at all raising it, and could spend out of her own considerable fortune if she need be. Kevin DeLeon basically starts at zero. The money he has squirreled away is for state campaigns, and he has to start from zero to try to match her money.
Uphill climb. Well, up next, we're going to talk a little bit more about what's going to happen in 2018 in California politics. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking about California politics in 2018 with Dan Walters of Cal Matters and John Myers of the LA Times. So, Dan, what kind of propositions and initiatives are likely to see on the November ballot?
Heaven only knows.
Well, we're going to see something on the gas tax, likely.
Well,
we don't even know that for sure. There are a lot of things that could go on the ballot. Those on the right want to have a gas tax repeal, for example. Those on the left might like to have a universal health care measure,
Single payer.
changing Proposition 13, or there's all sorts of stuff kicking around. I mean, literally dozens of things, and there's just no way to tell at this point. Almost a year
guarantee
before
there's going to be
election.
something. We just don't
There'll
know
be
what.
something. There'll be a few things on the June ballot, things that the legislature puts on.
Yeah.
But all initiatives now all have to go on the November ballot, and all of these things are just kind of churning out there without any real certainty as to what's actually going to make
I'll give you a strong candidate for the ballot, and it's not because I wrote an LA Times column about it recently. Sorry, plug. That is this issue of privacy. You've got a Bay Area real estate guy who has his own money, who has written a ballot measure that says basically you control all of your information. Companies have to ask your permission in lots of ways they don't now, and would also allow you individuals or the Attorney General or someone in local DAs, I believe, to take a company to court for a privacy breach and assess damages, big damages. The business community is absolutely worried about this ballot measure. Alistair McTaggart, who is the Bay Area developer who's put it out there, he has enough money to get it on the ballot. It would be first in the nation. It would lead the discussion about consumer privacy. I think it could be one of the big ones in November.
I guess we're going to have to wait and see. You know, one, John, a big issue that we're going to be seeing for certain is a U.S. Supreme Court decision about unions, and it's Janus versus AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees. Potentially, this could strip public sector unions of the right to collect fees from workers it represents, but who refuse to pay. Could this spell the end of unions as a political force?
I mean, you know, I guess the question is like, how big of a political force? I mean, certainly, I don't think you could say that they are going to be exactly as they are now if this goes through. I mean, there've been like, we've had multiple efforts to try to poke back that fee structure there at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, Friedrichs versus the California Teachers
Yes.
Association would have been decided had not Scalia passed away.
If Scalia had been dead, then you would have had a different discussion earlier. I know the unions have been looking at this. They know it's coming. They know they have to come up with something. The question is, can they come up with a political system of raising money that's anywhere near the size of the one they have now?
Seems like they're going to take a big hit.
I think they'll take a big hit. I wouldn't be surprised to see them lose 25 or 30% of their membership, dues-paying membership as a result of this. It's an interesting thing that the legislature did this last year. They stuck a little provision in state law saying that the unions could have access to the contact information of public employees, but nobody else could, trying to prevent anti-union groups from starting to contact employees and say, hey, you don't have to pay union dues anymore if this decision comes down. So that's a kind of a, and I would not be surprised to see that provision of law challenged in court as well, because it grants unions something that nobody else has, which is access to this information.
And the unions think that's pretty important because they have a chance to talk to the worker,
Right.
you know, early on in the process.
There's even another law that says that the unions have a right to meet with new employees, basically to persuade them to join the union. They have that guaranteed right now. In the union, I guess the new employee has to listen to the pitch, whatever it is, as a result of that. So they are taking some steps.
And that one was crafted as the Friedrichs case was in Washington. So I mean, they have been thinking about it. It just remains to be seen.
In fact, there was one meeting that the California Teachers Association had. It's something like when, not if, this decision comes down, what do we do now? So, I mean, they're very well aware of the danger it poses.
But, you know, this does somewhat parallel federal law because there's something called an Excelsior list where employers have to give the union the names and addresses of everyone in the bargaining unit 7 days prior to an election. So they're kind of tracking that a little bit. What are the things you think the Democrats are going to do to help unions? A major supporter for California Democrats.
Well, I mean, I think it's going to depend on the union. I mean, not all unions are created equal, due respect to the folks in organized labor. So if you look at the ones that are most powerful, law enforcement unions are very powerful. The teachers union is very powerful, the California Teachers Association. So I think the question is, which ones of those come forward to say we're looking for a different way of doing this? And it is fascinating that it's happening in the middle of a governor's race, of an open seat governor's race, all these statewide races where Democrats run to the left and run to unions for support. And you know, maybe you've kind of given us a crystal ball here, Mark. What will the litmus test be for those candidates?
You know, that could be a big issue in the gubernatorial campaign. What are they going to do about this decision when it comes down? It could be changing the political landscape in the state. I want to thank our guests, John Myers of the LA Times and Dan Walters of Cal Matters, for joining us. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, you can log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.